Welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate after the freeing of Roméo Langlois at the hands of leftist FARC rebels in Colombia for 33 days. We're taking a closer look at a movement that is now in its 49th year of existence. With us to talk about it, Colombia's ambassador to France, Gustavo Adolfo Carvajal. Thank you for being back with us. Also with us, Ricardo Abdahal, Paris correspondent for Colombian daily El Espectador. From Bogota, Silke Pfeiffer of International Crisis Group, Paris-based journalist and media consultant. Also with us, Eduardo Quay, and Cyril Vanier, France 24 senior correspondent. Welcome back to all of you. Before the break, we were talking about the hard line. Ricardo was mentioning the hard line that doesn't want perhaps a negotiated solution. And it's true that Colombia's former president, Alvaro Uribe, has been front and center, accusing, by the way, our correspondent of being biased in favor of the rebels. I'll read you what he tweeted. He said, Langlois, a journalist's curiosity is one thing. Identifying with terrorists is another. And if that's there you see the tweet in French. There it is in English. If that's not clear enough, he also sent this as on Twitter. Langlois knows how to lie. Today he returned to the freedom which it seems he never lost, but he also returned to the lying that he never forgot. Those are some pretty strong accusations. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's not. President Uribe has always had his position on being very strong against the FARC, and that has been, the way he manages his government. He was very successful in helping bring stability to the country.
Here it's a former head of state accusing our reporter of being biased. Is Roméo Langlois been biased in his reporting?
I wouldn't say biased. It's his opinion, and we should respect what his opinion is, as the same as you should respect Mr. Uribe's position. In this conflict, there has always been, that balance of how to report and how to report the conflict, which is not easy.
Eduardo Quay, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that Uribe here shows a deep misunderstanding of the role of journalists and journalism. I mean, journalism supposedly is to go out and try to get the story, even if parts of that story are obnoxious or hurtful to some people. Just because you go and meet with guerrillas and film them and interview them and bring out their story doesn't mean that you are on their side. And I really think that he's over the line on this one. However, I think that even perhaps more importantly is that it shows the polarization that remains in Colombian society. The FARC have done a lot of damage. A lot of people have been killed. As you mentioned, 49 years of this. But I think he would have better done not to say anything in this case.
All right, and to corroborate what you're saying, Eduardo, ordinary citizens in the capital, not as hard on Romeo, but also taking a dim view of the FARC. Here's a tweet from Dizzy, who lives in Bogota. He says, Roméo Langlois, please try not to make good publicity or justify a group that have killed and kidnapped so many people. Glad you're safe now. So it is tough, Ricardo Abdallah, to maybe get both sides to agree on this. Why is it because of the fact that we'll see a clip of it in a moment, that Romeo went and did reports with the rebels? Is that why Uribe is angry?
I think that, as it has been said, there's a strong polarization in the country. Now we are somehow blocked between an extreme right and tendency to say that everything that's on the left is extreme. That means if you go and just talk with the FARC, you are with them. And I think that is a danger for an eventual peace process in Colombia, because even if President Santos will be willing to do some signs or to talk with them, there is this strong line that's headed by Uribe, who will eventually block and start saying that he's now with them. I mean, I've been reading in Twitter, in the comments in the newspapers, some people claiming that Santos is with the FARC because he's not strong, fighting them strong enough. So now we have this hard line that's headed by Uribe, and I think that's one of the main dangers for peace.
Let's ask Silke Pfeiffer, does President Santos have to worry about his right flank?
Well, definitely he has to worry about that. And he's clearly also taking care of that. I mean, I agree that the problem is the polarization in the country. And, you know, this is not the only event that President Uribe reacts to. He basically reacts to every step of the current government. So we are very used to his Twitters now. In that sense, and as I said before, it is very important that the issue of peace doesn't remain within the presidency, but is taken out into society. One interesting latest development is that the fact that Congress is currently discussing what is called a legal framework for peace, which would, you know, allow authorities to introduce transitional justice mechanisms for illegal armed groups in the context of a peace process. That the fact that Congress is debating this proposal has generated a whole debate within society and has somehow has put the issue of peace again on the agenda. This is what I think needs to happen. And at the same time, well, President Santos needs to continue preparing the grounds, and that implies reforms, that implies implementing the victims' law, land restitution, to show that, well, he's actually making efforts to address the structural causes of the conflict.
Right,
and that is, well, what needs to happen in order to reduce polarization.
And for the record, by the way, Roméo Langlois, again, at that Thursday press conference opening with a tribute to the soldiers who protected him and to those, of course, who lost their lives in that raid in which he was captured by the FARC. Wednesday evening, after his release, Langlois criticizing the FARC for using him for publicity purposes.
It was the FARC's 48th birthday. I thanked them for inviting me to celebrate it, but I told them, next time you want a little press, just give me 3 or 4 days' notice. I know some people. We can come and have a little party. It's not worth holding me 33 days just for that.
Now, there was a comment made by Uribe earlier this week, Silke Pfeiffer, while in Peru, in which he said that the FARC had become the world's largest drug cartel. Is there any truth to that?
Well, it's certainly not for the entire, in what regards the entire organization. Drug trafficking remains an important income source for FARC, although declining. But it doesn't mean that it has become an end in itself for the entire organization, as it has become for other illegal armed groups in Colombia. That doesn't mean that there are units and fronts, particularly in the south, the so-called financing fronts, which are responsible for raising funds, that have become extremely corrupted by drug trafficking and who've totally lost ideology. So in that sense, I don't think it is true to talk about a narco guerrilla, because FARC leadership retains, I would say, an important ideological base and discourse and convictions, you know, after having fought almost 50 years in the jungle. But there are important factions of FARC who have become, you know, very corrupted by drug trafficking, and who are likely to not participate in a peace process, I dare to say.
All right.
And this is, of course, a risk.
All right. So on both sides, hardliners and for different reasons. Back in 2010, Roméo Langlois was allowed to film with the rebels. He went to the Cauca province, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, in southwestern Colombia. Here's a sample of what he filed.
Despite the modernization of the army, the Cauca Mountains remain very much guerrilla territory. For decades, they've stalked this unforgiving terrain. For the area's indigenous Indians, the FARC are part of the landscape. Often the rebels set up camp near settlements to be near supplies. Local peasants have little choice but to offer them a free meal. Despite the FARC's demands on the local population, here it's the army that is seen as an occupying force.
Under the Uribe regime, indigenous people have been attacked by the army. They send soldiers on drugs who steal from houses. If a woman passes by, they rape her. They say the guerrillas are the bad guys, but I don't think so. True, if we don't obey them, they punish us. But that's the way things work here, and we just have to make do with it.
Most guerrillas are young Indians who still speak their indigenous language. Joining the FARC is above all a way to make a living.
At home, we don't have all the advantages that you get here, like healthcare and education. It's a bit like school.
Despite the risks, many young people join the rebels looking for a better future. These trainee guerrillas are just 14. In a year's time, they'll be fighting for real.
Ricardo Abdallah, your reaction when you see those images?
Yeah, you can't deny that when you talk to people, especially to young people who's been to the guerrillas, they don't really have an ideological background. I mean, they are just there because everybody else around is there, and that's what we see there. When you talk to young people who's been there, they say, what else can we do? So if they have the paramilitary, they will join them. If they have the guerrilla in town, they will join them. And that's what we are seeing there. It's always the vacuum of the state that it's filled by some other, let's say, occupying force. And the people who's there, they don't really have the option to do anything else.
Romeo Langlois was captured on a government operation to break up cocaine labs in the jungle in early 2008. Cyril Vanier, you traveled to the border between Colombia and Ecuador. What did you learn when you saw those cocaine labs? It seems a bit abstract to a lot of us.
Well, what you see is two things. First of all, logistically, understand a little bit better how the guerrilla works. They take advantage of an area of the country that is very remote, where there is very little infrastructure, and there is very little government presence around the clock. They take advantage of that to have a presence that is very difficult to attack. They move around in the jungle. It's very difficult to locate their drug labs. And what they do is they infiltrate the population. They mingle with the population. They buy the goods from the farmers, from the shopkeepers. And in exchange, the population, well, they don't want to be attacked. They don't want to be punished, as we saw in the report. So they keep their mouths shut when government officials, be it from Colombia or Ecuador, come by and ask them whether they've seen FARC. The villages that I went to were quite clearly FARC-infested villages, but no one would tell you so. Because the villagers are, and we saw that in the report, are basically protecting themselves, and they're caught in the middle between the army and the FARC. And if they want to survive, if they want to continue to have a livelihood, they have to continue to play one against the other and learn to keep their mouths shut. So the villagers are really caught in the middle here, and many of them do not have an alternative but to cooperate with the FARC, at least on a temporary basis.
Eduardo Quay, when you look, since the Clinton administration, the U.S. has stepped up the amount of aid it's given to Colombia. When you hear what the way Cyril describes that area, when you hear the way Silke Pfeiffer describes the guerrilla tactics nowadays, the low-profile guerrilla tactics at times of the FARC, is that money being well spent?
Well, when I hear all of this, what I think, I thought that was what you're going to ask me. What I think about is Vietnam, and I think about how it's impossible to pacify a population under those circumstances of guerrilla warfare. Having said that, the American aid to Colombia under Plan Colombia is absolutely massive, and I think that it got off to a slow start, but I think it has had some positive effect. There's no question about it. There's no question that under Uribe, with American aid, the FARC have been losing militarily little by little, and we're seeing that. They controlled about.
But they're still there in any case.
Oh, they're still there, but you're dealing with the Amazon jungle. It's very difficult, and that's why I think about Vietnam as well. It's extremely difficult. But at one point, not too many years ago, they did control about 35% of Colombian territory, and I don't think that is, I know that is no longer the case. And many Colombians, when I was there, would tell me, it was impossible for us to drive from point A to point B. Now we can. So there has been progress in that sense. I think maybe the most difficult part is now going to start because many, about 9,000 or 10,000 rebels deserted. Those who are left are obviously the hardcore, about 8,000 or 9,000. And now, how are they going to really be willing to come to the negotiating table? And is the government going to be willing to come to the negotiating table? As was mentioned before, this was tried in the past, and the government got badly burned. And so now they are making some concessions, some of which will be some demands that will be difficult for the FARC to concede, I think. To go back to Uribe for a moment, perhaps Uribe was the right man at the right time to get this under control. But now Santos is the right man at the right time because he seems a little bit more flexible in his approach once the situation stabilizes further. I think the increase in attacks by the FARC that we are seeing is an effort to come to this negotiating table whenever that happens in the strongest possible position.
Ambassador Carvajal, we won't tell anyone. This is just between us. Does that mean we're close to sitting down to the negotiating table?
We have no idea. It all depends on how the FARC develops. And I would like to comment on what Ms. Pfeiffer was mentioning from Bogota. The problem with the FARC is when it started with a lot of ideology many, many years ago. But they have lost that. And when you compare what has happened in Colombia and what happened with leftist guerrillas in other countries, the big difference is the drug trafficking. And they got involved in the drug trafficking since the 80s, and they heavily are involved in the drug trafficking today. And that makes the whole situation a lot more complicated when you compare peace processes in other countries and what we would try to achieve in Colombia in the future.
And we'll leave it there, but I want to thank you, Ambassador Carvajal, for joining us, Eduardo Quay as well, Ricardo Abdallah, Cyril Vanier, and Silke Pfeiffer for being with us from Bogota. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Business is next. Will Edwards will be with you.